Welcome to the Only Human podcast, a platform for understanding what makes us human during a pandemic, through a transition, and after a crisis.
When COVID-19 became known, several comparisons were made with the Spanish flu of 1918. Perhaps as an attempt for humanity to learn from its recent past and not repeat any avoidable errors. In this episode, we hear from Justin Vipperman about the influence of individuality and freedom within the confines of a global pandemic. Justin is a historian and professor at the College of Southern Idaho.
The thing that most fascinates me is this idea of individuality and the pandemic. Some of the things that I've seen relate to the Spanish flu or the influenza epidemic of 1918, specifically here in the West and in Idaho. So in March 1918, we had American troops that headed out to fight in World War I. They probably got sick in Kansas before leaving, but they took the sickness to Europe. And when the U.S. declared war on Germany, the sickness made its way into Spain, and which is where we get in May of 1918. There were about 18 million Spaniards who contracted the disease, and that's where we get the idea of the Spanish flu, which is why it was called the Spanish flu. However, within the next year, the virus killed more than 500,000 people in the US and 21 million worldwide. So what is so fascinating to me, there was what happens here in the United States that we don't see in other areas around the globe. And that is this idea of individuality. In October of 1918, newspapers started reporting that there was this infection that was going around. There's few stories that begin here in Boise, Idaho. But on October 8th, the newspaper here reports that the State Board of Health, in accordance with the U.S. Supreme or Surgeon General, recommends that the state should probably start quarantine measures. And so they start prohibiting all public assemblies. They stop people from going to theaters, dance halls, town halls, assemblies, and churches. Schools were closed shortly after that on October 11th. And basically the State Board of Health anticipates 30 cases within the next month is what they're anticipating, which today we wouldn't see as a lot, but Idaho at that point in time thought that was a lot. The first case is reported on October 10th here in Twin Falls, Idaho. And on October 15th, we start to see paid advertising in newspapers that is how to avoid the influenza. Wash your hands, to stay outside, avoid people, to brush your teeth, and then to cover your mouth when you cough. These are all things that we're seeing today, right? There's a list of things that people have seen over time that work, and it's the exact same thing during 1918. On October 23rd, an editorial recommends closing cigar stores and hotel lobbies. Now, the cigar store is such an interesting one to me because this is where people would have congregated at that time. People would have gone to the cigar store and hung out. They would have talked. It would have been much like a bar today. Hotel lobbies is another one. And so they start to close those places. The paper also reports that they're starting to see increases by the end of October. Around the state, we're seeing different towns, Twin Falls with 34, Filer with 13, Boise is in the 60s. And so smaller towns start to self-impose a quarantine. Kimberly, Idaho, just outside of Twin Falls, make sure that no passenger trains can stop in Kimberly and let people off. They also shut the roads down. No cars are able to come in, and there's no access into Kimberly because people are so fearful of what's going on. And at this point, the community is still thinking about the community. We need to make sure that the community is safe. And so because there's no cases in Kimberly, nothing is really going on there. They want to make sure that nothing is coming in and out. This is late October, okay? But in November of 1918, there are a few cases on the rise, but there still are few cases. And on November 11th, with armistice signed, people celebrate. And so within days, there's a parade of over 5,000 men, women, and children in Twin Falls. And it's followed by the Twin Falls Band, and they walk the streets until midnight. There's a huge party about that the war is over, and therein changes everybody's idea of we should quarantine and keep everybody safe to we don't care anymore. We really care about ourselves. Fearful from the fallout, the State Board of Education issues orders to now quarantine in place, and the public reacts poorly. They start finding ways that they can subvert these ideas. The quarantining, masks are being pushed at this point by mid to late November. And so people start cutting holes in their masks and smoking through them just to subvert these measures. The pandemic gets worse, and within a couple of days after November 14th, we see a rise of 40 new cases in the city of Twin Falls, and it kind of takes off from there. And the Board of Health is really suggesting that it's because of these parades that are going on. These parades of the end of the war is pushing new cases to take hold. And so the city of Twin Falls decides that they've got to regulate. And so they start asking, or ordered police rather, to enforce a strict quarantine rule. They enforce a no crowd rule, and they prohibit spitting on the sidewalks and floors. Schools shut down in late December, again, a second time, because there's a flare of the influenza during that point in time. And people are really frustrated with what's going on. And so they start having Christmas parties, even though Christmas parties are supposed to be canceled at this point in time. With that going on, we have a lot of people who are pushing their idea of that this is unconstitutional, that this is not fair, that it's their freedom and their individuality, that they can do whatever they want. These mask rules is what sparks that idea. And so as people are wearing masks, they start to spread information that masks are not a deterrent and they're not effective, even though the State Board of Health has said that they are effective. People are not happy. And so as they start to go out in public without wearing masks as a political protest, we start to see heated discussions in Idaho and in the West as people are really upset about wearing masks and doing anything that might help the community to battle this further. One of those fights actually happens in a school board meeting in Twin Falls, as the school board wants to shut down school again after the Christmas break. So they're already shut down. They really would like to not continue any further. And so they want to shut down in January, just not come back after Christmas. And multiple school districts get together, and there is a huge fight with parents saying that people have to go back. They have to go back. One of the reasons is basketball season. They don't want to lose basketball season for their children. We're seeing that a lot today with football season. But we see these heated discussions that are taking place. Doctors warn about if we loosen the restrictions and we allow people to go back to school and we allow these public spaces to open again, that the epidemic is going to be prolonged. With that, we see several different places around the state go on lockdown, where they have police stationed at the corners of the city, not letting people in or out, even though the cases are low. They don't want to see any rise in those cases. This leads to actually some federal intervention with police the Army being sent in to Idaho, and really a fight that happens in the middle of the state. The real problem as schools start to go back is that the school district and parents are divided, and we can see that, but we start to see that Twin Falls, they decide to go back, Boise goes back, Kimberly goes back, Buell, a small town outside of Twin, decides that they're not going to go back, and they vote to not go back on Friday, and by Monday they've made a different decision and they go back on that decision, and so they end up going back to school. Most schools go back in January, but by February we have a third flare-up of influenza, and it kind of runs rampant. In fact, so much so that in several different places in Idaho, they take high schools and turn them into makeshift hospitals because people are getting sick at such a high rate. By late February and early March, we start to see the epidemic subside. And by the spring of 1919, there happens to be another flare up that happens in 19, but it kind of dies off and we don't see it any longer. But what I think is fascinating about this idea is that we're seeing these exact same things going on today, especially here in the West, of people saying that these are unconstitutional measures, that people should be able to have their own freedom. They even find ways that they are using this as a political protest and going to the school or going to stores and doing whatever they want without thinking of any regard for anyone else. As we see around the globe, there are other societies that do this, but in America, that is a big deal to us, to have our own freedom, our own individuality, our own ways of doing our own thing. The historian Patricia Nelson Limerick, in her book Legacy of Conquest, talks a lot about this, of the idea of an American West mentality, in which we continue to, in the West, think of ourselves as different, as unique, and therefore we have our own freedoms, liberty, rights, our own things that we're going to take care of, and therefore we want our autonomy and our individuality. As we can see, as this continues to go on, as the pandemic here in 2020 continues to go on, that is only magnified in the American West, as we continue to see people who are really not wearing masks, not adhering to CDC standards or requirements, but rather making a stand and having multiple protests. We've had multiple protests in Boise, in Salt Lake, in St. George, Utah, in these places where people are saying, look, this is an infringement of my rights, my personal freedoms. And that continues to go on. And I just want to make this historic similarity, which happened during the 1918 influenza epidemic as well, that this isn't anything new, although I think it is magnified at this time due to the polarization of our political parties, but that we are seeing a similarity between these two, of people saying, look, I only care about me and myself. I just want to make sure that the government isn't infringing on my rights. And therefore, we see this Western mentality again of being very individual and having our own freedoms and liberty.
If you wish to explore the topic of agency and autonomy further, we recommend works by Max Weber, Emile Durkheim, Talcott Parsons, Victor Turner, Edmund Leach, and Pierre Bourdieu.
If you would like to participate in this series or ask our speakers any questions, feel free to reach out to us.